This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 735 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. The NFL Sunday Million is now live on FanDuel. Put your NFL knowledge to the test and create your best 9-player roster while staying under the salary cap. Then using FanDuel's live scoring feature, you can follow along as you compete for your share of $1.2 million in prizes, with first place taking home $200,000, all for just $5. With your choice of stars like Jalen Hurts, Travis Kelce, and Jamar Chase all set to take the field on January 29th, there are plenty of big names to use in your lineup. Sunday is coming quickly, so head over to FanDuel and get your lineups in today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. It's a mailbag episode today. Let's get to it. The first question this week is from Twitter. It's from @PE918Sammy. It says, do you think the late round quarterback strategy has been laid to rest with how much an advantage the top 3 quarterbacks were this year? For a lot of reasons, no, I don't think that's the case. And before people think that I'm just saying that to defend the brand, I've been writing about this for years now. I've been writing about how the late round quarterback strategy can absolutely still work, but we're in a different era for fantasy. But I don't think this singular season now puts the late round quarterback strategy to rest. What I will say is this specific season, 2022, we had a much less linear drop from one quarterback to the next than we typically do. Meaning Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen, they separated themselves from the pack a lot more than what we typically see. Just to compare it to 2021, one season ago, the top quarterback was Josh Allen, who scored 23.7 points per game. That's back in 2021. Next on the list was Justin Herbert. He had 22.4. Then Brady was at 22. Then it was 21.5, 21.3, 20.8, 20.8, 20, and 20. Those were the points per game totals of quarterbacks as you went down the final season rankings list one by one. That's in points per game. This year, you had 3 quarterbacks who scored over 24.5 points per game. Among all quarterback seasons since 2011 where the quarterback played 8 or more games, those 3 quarterback seasons from 2022 rank in the top 10. They're top 10 seasons since 2011. We'd sometimes get these one-off seasons like Lamar Jackson in 2019 or Aaron Rodgers in 2011 or Patrick Mahomes in 2018. But we never got them all together like this. And then all the while, the rest of the position wasn't as strong. I'll read you the points per game totals of the QB4 through the QB10 this year. 21.9, 19.7, 19.7, 18.2, 18.1, 17.9, 17.8. The QB12 this year was Kirk Cousins. He scored 17.2 points per game. Just for some quick context, the QB12 in 2021, which is hilariously also Kirk Cousins, scored 18.8. So it went from 18.8 last year to 17.2 this year. In 2020, the QB11 scored 19.1 before a decent drop to 17.9. To put this all another way, we had stud performances this year. We had 3 of them. And then we had a really bad year at quarterback overall. That made those 3 quarterback seasons even better than they otherwise would be. Because they still would have been great, but they were even greater because the baseline was worse. If there's one thing I've preached through my years of doing this, it's to not overreact over something that happens in one singular season. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, they should all be highly sought after fantasy assets next year. They should all be top quarterbacks in fantasy drafts. But we should still bet on this gap not existing the same way that it existed here in 2022 or during the 2022 season. Because that's what history has taught us. And it's not like Justin Fields, a late round option, didn't exist this year. Those players are still going to have decent seasons. And if and when the gap closes a bit, those players will be more valuable. The late round quarterback strategy is far from dead. It just isn't what it was back in 2015, 2016, 2017. But it hasn't been that way for a few years now. This next question is from @ThomasBeck94. It says, how many years do you think until the bell cow back is gone? Seems like more and more teams are moving to some form of committee each year. Now, I don't think bell cow running backs are ever going to just be gone. There are always going to be Saquon Barkleys out there because some players have talent that's undeniable. and teams want those players on the field all the time. With that being said, this question depends entirely how you define the term bell cow. So I messed around with some arbitrary parameters to sort of help with that definition. I looked at running backs in recent years who played at least 8 games and averaged at least a 70% running back rush share per game and a 10% target share per game. So they were heavily utilized on the ground, and they were utilized pretty heavily through the air as well. This past year, we had 4 of those running backs. That was the exact same number that we had in 2021 and 2020. In 2019, we had 5. In 2018, 7. In 2017 and 2016, we also had 5. And then in 2015, we only had 2. We've sort of had this conversation about bell cow running backs for the last decade or so in fantasy football. I think it would be impossible for them to just completely disappear, because there's always going to be a talented enough running back to warrant that work. So I don't think they're going to be gone, at least in the near future. This next question is from Patreon. It's from Kyler. It says, "Hi JJ, just wanted to start out saying thanks for helping me make it to my league's championship this year, and looking forward to contending consistently now thanks to your draft guide and weekly rankings. My question is Elijah Moore a buy, sell, or hold? Does he still possess wide receiver 1 upside? I'd love to hear your thoughts on his possible range of outcomes." So something I like to do in these situations is look at any potential comparables that we might be able to find. Players who have sort of done similar things as the player that we're analyzing. Most of you already know about my year 2 model, but I'll just give you a brief rundown. Essentially, the year 2 model looks at how a rookie performs and attributes a score based on the rookie performance alongside that player's prospect score. So it combines how the player looked in my prospect model entering the NFL with how that player did as a rookie. And it ends up predicting year 2 and year 3 fantasy performance a lot better than the player's rookie season points per game average. And it makes sense intuitively. James Robinson, for example, he was someone who had a great rookie season in fantasy. But the year 2 model didn't see him as an elite player despite his rookie season. That's because his prospect score wasn't super high. He was an undrafted player. It's always a lot easier to invest in players who have a good prospect profile, who have that backbone, because it shows us that they were very good outside that one rookie season. Now, Elijah Moore had a good prospect score, and then he had a good rookie season, and that led to a good year 2 model score. He was actually placed in the percentile tier that typically leads to strong performance in either year 2 or year 3. Now, this is all laid out in the prospect guide. I talk in detail about this model and the hit rates for different percentile groups. And then I profile the year 2 players. But Elijah Moore has now played 2 seasons, one good year and one pretty bad year. So the question I ask myself in these situations is, what other players came out strong and then just sort of crashed during year 2? And what happened to those players moving forward? With Moore ranking the 96th percentile in the year 2 model, I grabbed all wide receivers since 2011 who had a year 2 model score between the 94th and the 98th percentile. And then I looked at players who played 3 or more seasons. That gave me 19 different wide receivers. Now, it's not a huge sample, but we can start here just to see if any players have seen a similar journey as Elijah Moore. Now, when you look at this group, the wide receiver with the lowest year 2 points per game average was Elijah Moore. So again, this is all year 2 model wide receivers ranked in the 94th to the 98th percentile. Elijah Moore was the absolute worst in year 2. Now, you might be asking, were any of them close? And the answer is not totally. Jerry Jeudy averaged over 2 more points per game than Moore did during his second season in the league. But we also know that Jeudy was hurt, and fortunately we saw a resurgence from him in year 3. The other player who was close enough to Moore was Corey Coleman. Now you might be thinking, man, JJ, your model must suck if Corey Coleman after year 1 was still ranked in the 94th to 98th percentile. Well, Coleman saw his score decrease from year 1 to year 2. He was a 96th percentile prospect as a 15th overall pick, and then that dropped to the 94th percentile entering year 2. You never like to see that year 1 to year 2 drop. Now, Coleman obviously never amounted to anything, but Coleman also didn't have close to the kind of season Elijah Moore had as a rookie. So looking through the lens of the model, Moore so far looks like an outlier. If we look strictly at yards per route run, we get some interesting insights. I sort of alluded to this on the Things That I Got Wrong episode 2. As a rookie, among 50-plus target rookies since 2011, Elijah Moore had about a 65th percentile yards per route run rate. When you look at the rookie wide receivers who then saw 50 targets in year 2, Elijah Moore's drop in yards per route run is the absolute biggest drop among that group. So he saw the worst drop in yards per route run from year 1 to year 2 since 2011. Next on that list is Doug Baldwin. The difference, though, is that Baldwin really didn't have that bad of a year 2. He was just that good in year 1, so any drop was going to be big. Whereas with Moore, his year 2 yards per route run rate was actually bad. After Baldwin is Jalen Reagor, Chris Givens, Keelan Cole, and Cordero Patterson before you start getting into good players like Jamar Chase and Keenan Allen. But again, we have to give this context. Jamar Chase and Keenan Allen being in the bottom 10 doesn't mean they were trending to be bad players. It's just that their rookie season yards per route run rates were really, really high. So sustaining that was going to be difficult. They were still incredibly efficient in year 2. Elijah Moore was not. In fact, if you just look at Moore's raw year 2 yards per route run and compare that to the sample of wide receivers, it's pretty horrifying. I mean, you could just look at year 2 wide receivers with 50 or more targets alongside their yards per route run rates, and when you look at where Elijah Moore is, you might start feeling sick to your stomach. I've got over 160 year 2 wide receivers with 50 or more targets since 2011. This is a sample size that's pretty big. Elijah Moore ranked in the 6th percentile among that group in yards per route run. So as a second-year wide receiver, his yards per route run rate was in the 6th percentile. And it takes a long time before you get to someone who's actually good on that list. Davante Adams was in the 15th percentile. Robert Woods was in the 21st percentile. I mean, this list and where Elijah Moore is located is non-difference maker after non-difference maker. And keep in mind, a player like Adams did not start his career out like Elijah Moore did. Davante Adams struggled to start his career. He had a huge turnaround. That was not normal, but it also showed just natural progression. So what exactly does this all mean? It means that number 1, Elijah Moore is sort of an outlier case. We really haven't seen a wide receiver go from having such a good first year to a not so good second year, at least in recent history. But really good fantasy assets usually don't have the type of season that Elijah Moore just had. So I'm not really optimistic that Moore becomes something significant in fantasy football. Maybe he hits a wide receiver 2 season at some point, maybe, but I would be shocked if the ceiling's there. With that being said, whether you buy or sell someone has everything to do with the market. According to Dynasty League Football's January ADP, Elijah Moore is wide receiver 41. That's roughly where I've got him. But I will say, after some of this research, I'm going to bump him down my February rankings a little bit. So if you have a league mate who's willing to pay to get him, if a league mate wants to blame all of this on Zach Wilson or something, I'm okay with trading him away. And it pains me to say that. I just have to be honest. I have to do objective analysis. But I do think that overall, he's probably just a hold, just given where the market probably is at with him. You just have to hope that he really is an outlier and then he can bounce back. This next question is also from Patreon. It's from Zachary. It says, do you think the Falcons can improve their offensive efficiency and increase their pass rate this year? They have a lot of draft capital and cap space this offseason, as well as some great fantasy talents just waiting to be unlocked. Yeah, for sure. The Falcons are a team that could be looking for a new quarterback. And even if they stick with Ritter, let's say, hypothetically speaking, he should be better just given the way that we see quarterbacks progress from year 1 to year 2. But there's natural regression that will come with their pass rate too. I know they want to run the football because that's what Arthur Smith wants. But they had the 4th lowest pass rate of any team since 2011. And teams with that low of a pass rate almost always see higher pass rates year over year. So yes, they should be able to improve on offense next year. And I'm very, very big into Drake London. I loved him as a rookie, but the only reason he wasn't more fantasy relevant was because the offense was just so limiting volume-wise. Among 50-plus target rookie wide receivers since 2011, London had the 14th best yards per route run, and he had the 3rd best targets per route run. He's a stud, and I can't wait for him to be surrounded by a better situation. The last question this week is from @CastleJeffrey. It says, are you looking at expanding your draft guide this year to include tight end and quarterback? Really looking forward to buying it again. So I'm assuming that this question means prospect guide and not the draft guide. But I can tell you that I would love to expand the prospect guide to include quarterbacks and tight ends. I would absolutely love it. The problem is I don't have models for quarterbacks and tight ends. And I've tried. especially this offseason. Here in January, I worked a lot on the tight end model. I've come up with some things that are okay, that are more predictive than draft capital itself, but not by much. Turns out modeling for quarterback and tight end in fantasy football is really, really hard. So as much as I would love to offer those positions up, I don't have a model for those positions. And I won't in the 2023 version. Now, those guys are still going to be part of my rankings, but the focus is still on running back and wide receiver. And obviously, those are the positions that matter most in fantasy football anyway. But I can tell you, I've tried. And I have something, but it's not good enough to publish, in my opinion. I want something that's really, really good, not okay. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. As a reminder, you can pre-order this year's prospect guide by going to lateround.com. All the details are on there, so I'll save you some time. And I'll just say, head to lateround.com, purchase it, support me. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you next week.